Hello and welcome to the Spirit Garden. Was it Spirit Garden podcast? What are we? Is it just Spirit Garden?
Either or, I'm happy with Spirit Garden or Spirit Garden podcast. I think
All
the
right,
best.
we'll go Spirit Garden.
Sweet.
Just we want to be a bit different. This is our unique selling point. And anyway, this is our debut episode. As you can see, it's going fantastically.
So good.
Yeah. So, ideally, we probably would have done this with a bit more planning time, but we kind of have to do this episode because of the spring statement that was on Wednesday last week. Uh,
Yes.
this has been an interesting debut week, I think, for us because it seemed like the most horrible week because something was something was coming out in the news like every day, and it was getting really overwhelming to deal with.
Yeah, it was, and then the statement itself and um sort of people's reactions to it. The Labour Party seems like split itself on how it
Mhm.
feels about the spring statement. Obviously, the Conservatives are like the main opposing party, but also the Lib Dems don't seem particularly pleased, especially with the welfare cuts, which is like the main thing that I think we'll probably get into today, as well as um, some other things like the defense spending. But
Yeah,
it's been controversial for sure.
yeah. The main point seems to be the welfare cuts, which have not gone down well, to
No.
put it lightly. Uh, I think that will take up most of our time here. So I think we'll start off with something that I found quite amusing that happened after the spring. So the spring statement was like one part of that day in Parliament, and I didn't realize like how I thought that the day in Parliament ended after the statement, and then because I was like reading through some of the comments, and then because I was watching the recording on, I think it was on BBC or no, it was on the Parliament website. I was watching it, and I was still watching it after the statement, and then I'm looking at the transcript, and there's like things still keep coming in the transcript. I'm like, this thing is still going on.
Yeah.
It went on until like 6 p.m. It was nuts. It was such a long day. But yeah, anyway, after the after the spring statement, they had a recess and they came back for like they were going over bills and stuff. And there was a legislation coming out about like banning smoking or something. Um, and probably the funniest part of this was because I noticed Nigel Farage was like asking a question. I was like, what is Nigel Farage asking a question about like legislating smoking? I'm like listening to it, and and he goes on this waffle about like, oh, we don't regulate drinking, so why should we regulate smoking? Uh, and he was going on about like we should. He was doing this thing that you'll hear. I guess libertarians will be like, people should be allowed. Oh no, it's a very Thatcherist thing where it's like personal liberties and things, and people should be allowed to do whatever they want, and the government just sits there as like shaking their finger to be like, that's a bad thing you're doing. That's what he believes. And I'm
Yeah.
summarizing his statement. It's much more amusing if you listen to him and make these arguments.
Yeah, 'cause
Uh,
he's such a petty man. I got a reform thing through the door over this week and was like, oh god, no.
it reform is a funny one in our constituency because they only ever showed up in the election. They only showed up in the election, and they kind of pissed off since then. You can see the priority of the reform. Anyway, so what with Nigel Farage's question? Like he asked his question. I don't remember what the. Oh no, the question was like, should government really be, regulating what people do? And the hilarious part was he was followed up by Dr. Becky Cooper, who's a MP for Worthing West. Now, I want to clarify, like you didn't mishear. Like she's her title is doctor. She's not a she doesn't have a PhD in like fucking philosophy or something. She's a medical doctor. It was surreal to me, and like in the part when you watch that bit after he sits down, there's like a pause because like she's about to come up and she's like, how do I follow this up without making him look like an idiot?
You should always make Faraj look like an idiot at every given opportunity.
It was such a bizarre thing. 'Cause it's like, how are you? People get cancer from smoking, Nigel.
Yeah, it's a weird hill to die on, but I think reform is um fundamentally based on having weird hills to die on. So it's
Yeah,
also very on brand.
bizarre. Uh, oh yeah. After that, after the spring statement, after that day, there was a video came out. I'm just gonna. These are like a couple few things that I kind of wanted to point out before we get into the meat of this, because it's gonna be it's a it's a depressing. Actually, no, it's not depressing. It's a bit of a downer episode. I will admit this
Yeah.
statement. Jeremy Corbyn pushing for nationalization of water. That was pretty good.
Yeah. Oh my
Uh,
God, that I could. Sorry, but water specifically is something that we can touch on. I just have some very strange like knowledge of water recently. Thames water specifically. Um, I won't get into it now, but it's an interesting one. Maybe if we do an episode on sort of Thatcher's privatization, we can get into that. But yeah, I have thoughts.
yeah. Oh yeah. I think he brought up the privatization stuff and how it was like it's yeah. He was talking about like how it's we could definitely I'll put that down as like something we can cover in either a future episode or next episode. Probably not next episode because I think next one is going to be another benefits one to cover anything we didn't cover today.
Yeah.
There's I don't know if people know this. The welfare state is a very complex beast.
What? I thought we were just giving money to people who didn't deserve it. I thought that if you ask like the British government, that's what we do. We just hand out money to fraudsters. I thought that was the whole thing.
According to the Telegraph, you can just like come to this country and just claim benefit.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, just you mentioned that and it reminded me of a clip of Farage. And you'll have to forgive me, I don't know where he is. But he's talking to people in the country where he is. I think it's somewhere Middle Eastern, I'm not sure. It was a long time ago since I saw the clip, and he's talking to these people, and he's like, "Wouldn't you think it was great if, you could come to the UK and we'll give you a house and we'll give you all these things, even though that's not how our immigration system works at all." And they're just
Hmm.
like, "No, I wouldn't like that. I don't want to live there. I like living here. This is where my family is. The weather in the UK is terrible." It's like just completely destroys his point. It's so good.
You'd have to wonder, like, people don't come here for the weather. They really don't.
Oh, no. Although it hasn't been too bad today, but let's not get into the weather. Dear God, right?
Yeah. uh, okay, so these are kind of unrelated to the UK, but kind of just things I wanted to point out. So, South of Midnight, that's a game by Compulsion Games, the guys who did We Happy Few and something else that I can't remember. That one's releasing mid next week.
Oh,
I'm very looking forward to that. Oh no, it's next weekend. Yeah, it's releasing next weekend, and I'm very much looking forward to it. They've released like very little gameplay about it, and I saw the story trailer a couple of days ago, which is great. It was music is on point.
oh,
I love it.
I do love a game with good music, much like
Hell yeah.
Spiritfarer. Phenomenal music.
Has such a nice art style. I highly recommend just taking a look at the game on Steam.
Yeah, if
Very
you
good.
fire me over a link after this, I'll have a look. I
Yeah.
don't think I've got anything like that coming up. I'm not really. I mean, I was excited for Tales of the Shire, kind of. I'm skeptical about that game, but that got pushed back a while ago. But that was due to come out in March, and it got pushed back again. I'm just not hopeful that it's going to be good.
Mhm.
One thing that I did, just to go back to when they did the spring statement, they were. Oh, there's been a lot of talk about especially with the show that's come out on Netflix. Is it Adolescence? I don't know. I don't have
Mhm.
Netflix at the moment, so I haven't watched it. But I see a lot of people talking about it, and there's a lot of debate about banning phones in schools. And this really stuck out to me because the Conservatives had me agreeing with Starmer, which I just didn't appreciate. So the Conservatives seem to be really pushing to just ban phones in schools, which is a bit weird to me because even when I was a kid, which was a concerning amount of time ago now, like you weren't allowed to just have your phone out in school. It was discouraged, and it's never been a thing that's acceptable. I don't have children. I don't know if it's sort of harder to manage now. I imagine it probably is, but Starmer is making the argument, and I assume the Labour Party broadly is making the argument that it's not so much about when kids have access to their phones, it's about what they are able to access.
Hmm.
And he's completely right, and I hate it when people I don't like are right, but he is right because not being able to access your phone between like what 8 in the morning and like 3:30, depending. School times are different all over the place, but like, what good is that if you can still access radicalizing content at like 4:30 in the afternoon or on the bus home, just because you can't access it during school hours? It just seems like such a strange specificity to argue over. But I do agree that there is an issue with what we are able to access online, specifically what children are able to access. And
This might warrant further discussion about social media because Blue Sky, I think, has been very interesting in the way I think people use it. Blue Sky, I really like for mainly that it basically gives people the opportunity to curate what they see. So it means that they basically have a bit more of a healthy relationship with social media in that they choose what they see, and depending on how they feel, like they're not like, you're not forced to see some South African billionaire tweeting about a game he's never played.
yeah, or something even worse like the Great Replacement Theory or some other absolutely
Mm-hmm.
insane nonsense. But this interests me in terms of the spring statement because leading up to it, there were talks of the Labour Party um, reducing or completely scrapping tax on big tech companies, and
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be something they could do here, and I guess it would be something that you'd have to look at the numbers. But if we have big tech companies, I think we absolutely should tax them. They can afford it. It's a great, there's no reason not to tax massive tech companies. Um, However, what I think would be an interesting incentive is we tax them and then we say, listen, if you want to pay less tax, you can make it so that this content is harder to access on your platform. Because, we know that huge corporations, especially tech companies, don't want to pay tax. So it's like, fine, you can pay less tax, but you have to make your platform safer for the British people and the British, children that can access them. And I think that would be a smart way to go about it. Whether or not they will, they'll probably just cut the tax for them because it's the Labour government and that's how they behave. But I just think
Mm-hmm.
that would be something that they could do. But whether or not they ever will is you know, we'll see what happens with that. But it is interesting to look at cutting that tax ahead of the spring statement. Um, when they're massively slashing welfare for people who need it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
very
That
lovely.
yeah, there's a few things that they've done which are questionable, like I mean, it's not questionable with the MP pay rise. I mean, that happens every April. I think every year they get a pay review, and then they usually get a rise. What's interesting about that pay rise? I'm not going to go into it too much here, but it was less than last year's. Like it was like half as much as last year's, but the timing of it is just horrific, right?
Yeah,
Timing, because like a month later they're like, oh yeah, we're slashing welfare.
yeah, it's optically just horrendous. But it'll be to do with like the tax year when they get pay rises and things, and
Yeah.
it's not great. People just don't want to see it, even though it's kind of like the expenses. Obviously, I've linked them in our doc, but you can look at the expenses of MPs. And while Rachel Reeves' expenses are nothing out of the ordinary, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. It's just it upsets people to look at her utilities because I don't know. If you know, or anyone who's listening to this maybe doesn't know, the idea is that an MP should live in their constituency. So, but they also should be going to London for their, work, such as in like Parliament and things like that.
Yeah.
So they often have two properties, and a lot of the costs for those properties are put into their expenses. So there are definitely better ways to do that, and it's kind of small beans compared to the rest of the problems that the government has in terms of what they've announced in the spring statement. But it is interesting to see how people get annoyed about it, even though
Mm.
it seems hypocritical. Even though it's standard practice, it's just optically kind of bad. But
Yeah. I think I'll skip the Studio Ghibli one. I assume that I just kind of threw it in there, but thinking about it now, I think people have already probably seen it. But
oh god,
that's
yeah,
uh,
dreadful.
I hope there's a lawsuit at the end of that road, because man, it's highly deserved.
Yeah, oh god, it's upsetting. I saw a content creator that I quite like. Her, not her directly, but her partner who's involved with her channel, posted one, and I was like, oh no. And it's so weird because I mean, if we could do an episode on veganism, I'd really love to have that conversation. But they are vegans, and a big part of veganism for a lot of people is the impact on the environment and the planet. I think it's a good reason to consider changing your eating habits to a degree. There's so much nuance there that it's a whole separate conversation. But it was strange to be like, do you know how destructive just generating that one image is to the planet? Like when you and a million other people are doing it, like it's so awful for the planet. It's crazy. So it was kind of jarring to see someone like that
Mm.
use AI, but yeah, that's a whole thing that we can get into, I guess, at a different point.
There's a whole thing we can talk about regarding that, because it's everywhere. It's
Yeah,
annoying. It's so annoying.
it's pretty bad.
Right. Shall we jump into it? So, did you look into these Dudley Council resignations?
Um,
I
see, I thought that this was more of a widespread problem than it was, but we have seen a lot of specifically Dudley Council resignations. I think I saw some articles that said five, some said nine, but I believe the intention there is that they are going to now run as an independent party, which will be interesting because that's something Corbyn has done and been really successful with in his constituency. So it could, if it is successful, there's, a small chance that it could inspire other constituencies to those MPs, those councillors to abandon the Labour Party and go independent. I would like to see that, but whether or not that happens we'll see, I guess. But that is their intention, is to run as independents.
Hmm. I think for the moment, at least in Parliament wise, a lot of the MPs seem to be dissenting opinions. Not so much. There's been resignations. At least what I saw during the spring statement, a lot of the people that were proposing a wealth tax were the people pushing against like the welfare cuts.
Yeah.
Were independents, but there were, I think, one or two Labour people. I don't remember exactly who they were, unfortunately. Um, I might be just completely misremembering, and it might have just been like Lib Dems and independents. Because a lot of what I saw was Labour people. I find these people very strange because they come up and they're like they front load their question with basically this performative, I guess, praise for for these things, and it's very strange. And I get that they're like a party, and then they want to maintain the sort of monolith that they all kind of think the same way. But it would be helpful to know if there's like dissenting opinions or like the welfare cuts,
Yeah.
other than like the council in Dudley.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there is. Unfortunately, I can't remember who it was specifically that challenged Rachel Reeves after she gave her spring statement, and then she obviously then takes questions from other MPs. But there were
Hmm.
a few. I know one of them was a Lib Dem. Unfortunately, I can't remember her name, but there was one other who might have been from within the Labour Party, who have basically asked point blank, why aren't we taxing multimillionaires? Which we absolutely should. I know you've linked in the notes something really interesting that I was reading over earlier, the Taxing Wealth report,
Mm.
which is it just. I'm sure we'll get into it as we sort of discuss the statement a bit more, but there's so much like revenue to be made from taxing wealth, and she just completely dodged the question. It was she didn't even allude to like a politician's answer. It was almost as if she didn't hear it, but two people at least point blank asked the question, and it's interesting that Labour can't or won't answer it when it's becoming a very, very popular question even amongst like the sort of general population. I think people are really starting to wonder why we aren't doing that. At least to me, it seems that way.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more apparent that they're hitting working class people more and more. And this is after like 40. Well, they keep bringing this up as like 14 years of Tory leadership, and obviously being hammered by like cost of living crises and stuff. And Labour's answer to this is welfare cuts,
Yeah.
and people are wondering like, but you got people like Richard Branson. There's um, Gary Stevenson, who said he's a multimillionaire, but he's been pushing heavily for tax, so he knows that like millionaires need to be taxed because obviously these people exist, and if if you got the working class and middle class getting poorer, then somebody's getting richer. It's not the government. The treasury is, but the treasury is struggling themselves. The banks are going a bit nuts as well. So the money has to be somewhere. Somebody's holding the money, and I mean, part of that's like the royals as well. They've
Oh God. Yeah.
dumped their money in their housing and stuff. They get a lot of tax-free shit. I think they get a lot of money from the taxpayer, and those aren't taxed either. Uh, this isn't part of the notes. I'm just kind of thinking. But yeah, no, it's pretty much just like, well, who do you have left?
Yeah, exactly. Like there is I was watching, I don't know if you watched Gary Stevenson on Question Time. It was
Oh no, I didn't see that.
oh,
I've been looking for it, but yeah.
it's good. I don't think he'll be invited back. Let's just put it that way. I don't think they'll have him back on. But it's it's this idea that, and I was sort of talking about this with my partner, who I speak to a lot because he has A levels in both politics and history, so he has a lot of historical context that I don't have. It's quite
Mhm.
interesting, um, and the Gary Stevenson brings up a good point about if he uses China as an example, and I don't know why he's specific. If there's a reason he chooses specifically as China as an example, um, but it's just a demonstration of the loopholes we tend to give the extremely wealthy in Britain.
Mhm.
So, and it was kind of a counter to the argument of, well, if we tax, and I've heard this like before in person in conversations with people, it's a really common sentiment. If we tax the ultra wealthy, then they'll just leave, right? But
Mhm.
so much wealth is in property ownership. And if you still own property in the UK, then in theory, you should still be paying tax on it if you're getting any income from anything in the UK that's tied up in capital, and that capital is like the assets that are in the UK. You should, in theory, still be paying tax on them. But I have a feeling there are specific loopholes that stop that happening in this country. It's something I'd really like to look into a bit more. But the idea that if we tax the rich, that they'll just leave, for the wealthy, the UK has some of the lowest tax rates in all of Europe. So we tax our working class very high in comparison to other European countries. but in terms of the tax on wealth, it's some of the lowest, like in the whole of Europe. So the idea that they'll leave, it's like, well, where will they go to? Because everywhere else will tax them more. And I think that that's something that's really important to know, is that if there was somewhere they could live where they were getting taxed less, they would do that already, but
Hmm.
they don't. So,
Yeah, it's a strange setup to have, I guess, the UK be some sort of like tax haven, because that doesn't help the country where the tax haven is in.
no.
Like if you're an American billionaire, you would why it's why you have a bank account in the Cayman Islands, even though you don't live there.
Yeah, most people
It's
don't live in tax havens. Like, obviously,
yeah,
there are people who do live there, but like, you don't go where the tax haven is typically. That's not really how they function.
yeah, and I'm kind of generalizing here, but I don't, from what I've seen of tax havens, they don't tend to be like places you'd want to live. At least if you're like earning, you know, if your revenue is in the millions, then I don't know, Panama isn't exactly your ideal residence.
No, sorry, it's just funny you should say Panama. Um, for it's the reasons that I won't bother getting into. But there are definitely a section of upper middle class people who do look to retire to Panama, but when you get like incredibly wealthy, that's not the sort of place that you generally look to. But
Hmm.
I do know personally someone in my life that has a fair amount of money that is looking to retire to Panama, and I just found that very funny that you said that specifically.
I was thinking of, what was it, the Panama Papers? Yeah, that whole thing. Um,
You'll have to tell me about that at some point. That's I've never heard that before.
was it a movie? Was it a movie or documentary? It might have been a bit of both. Oh no, yeah, no, it was a movie because it had like Meryl Streep and Josh Swimmer.
Just a documentary about Meryl Streep living in a tax haven.
Oh no, yeah,
Phenomenal.
it was, what was it? It was following Meryl Streep's character, and this was like, apparently they were pitching this as like a real thing that happened, and this is how like they kind of uncovered the Panama Papers, or at least these individuals. How they found out about it was, I think there was a boat that sank, and the guy who owned, I think, the company was David Schwimmer's character, and then he was trying to get the insurance, and then as he kept following this trail of like, why is insurance not paying out, he realizes that the company that he bought insurance from is basically a shell company of like another company, and he's basically screwed because they're not going to give him the money, because all the basically where he bought it from was like not a company. Basically, he's basically just been giving money to. He's basically been putting money into a black hole, thinking that he's getting he's paying for insurance, but he isn't until his boat sank, and then he's screwed. The people who were on the boat are screwed, and on the like, he basically, um, and Meryl Streep, I think, is going on this like, she's trying to find out, was it her husband died or something? I'm really struggling to remember the plot details of this movie. But basically, he starts following this trail of like, well, what's happening with this like company, and he's yeah, it's a whole thing, but it was this whole idea of like uh, millionaires, wealthy people setting up these like uh shell companies,
Yeah.
and they purport to do something, but like with this, like they purport to be like, I don't know, selling insurance, but they just don't do it because they're based in like, I don't know, Panama or something. They're not basically financially regulated, so they can't. You you buy insurance from them, they're not obligated to actually fulfill their side of it. They can just take your money and then not give you insurance.
Interesting.
Which,
Episode 2, deep dive on Panama.
yeah, it's a whole thing, and I'm kind of jumping all over a lot of details because I just don't remember. But this is like the just is. Why did I start talking about this?
I talking about tax havens.
Oh yeah, tax haven. Yeah. Why we want to be a tax haven? Bizarre.
Oh god. Right. Derailed slightly, but it's fine. So I think right.
Oh, the other thing, if we're gonna like talking about wealth tax, every time that question about wealth tax that came up to Rachel Reeves during that spring statement, she kept pulling out the non-dom status thing, abolishing the non-dom. Do you know what this is?
No, not at all.
So non-dom is like abbreviated for like non-domestic resident, and they basically it's somebody who like the example for this is Rishi Sunak's wife who holds like bank accounts here. Is it bank accounts? I think it's either bank accounts or like I think they have a house here.
Yeah.
Basically, she holds assets, whether it's monetary assets or some other asset here in the UK, even though she's not like a UK resident.
Mm.
And what basically the non-dom status allows them to do is basically not pay tax. They just don't pay tax on assets they hold. Like if you're not a resident of the UK, you don't pay tax on the assets that you own in the UK.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So Labour were abolishing that. Now it is a good thing that they're abolishing. And the key word there is abolishing. It hasn't come into effect. It comes into effect in April. And this is the kind of the shield that Rachel Reeves pulls out every time somebody asks about wealth tax. Especially during the spring statement, you'll see it. You'll hear her say it in the kind of waffle that she goes on.
Yeah. So just the interesting thing about that is if it comes into April, so that's a lot. Oh my god, it's the 30th of March. Jesus. So that's soon.
Yeah.
A lot sooner than I thought it was. It's literally like tomorrow. Or the day after. So that doesn't really give them time to sell, providing they didn't know about it beforehand. But I do agree they should be taxed, but it's so easy for them to just move assets if they're not like property assets, or just sell and then they sell to someone who's equally as wealthy because chances are they have, property that is worth a substantial amount. So it's one of those things that Labour does that sounds good, but ultimately is not helpful. So if it's assets that you can sell, you just sell them to a different wealthy person and then you don't pay tax on them. Whether or not they do that, I don't know. I'd have to look more into it because I hadn't heard or I hadn't noticed when she'd brought this up before. But yeah, it's just that's not what taxing the wealth means. Like I feel like they're intentionally missing the point.
Okay, so I need to clarify what I just said there. So non-dom is non-domicile residents. I just pulled up the Gov UK thing. UK residents who have their permanent home domicile outside the UK may not have to pay UK tax on foreign income.
Oh, right, okay. Okay.
So if you're a resident of the UK but you don't live here, as in your home address isn't in the UK, so you could be in like the US. I think this is primarily because rich people have multiple homes, so they can just move their address.
Yeah.
And this is a loophole, basically, where like because the only way this could apply is to someone who's wealthy, because they have multiple homes. So they buy a home in the UK where they live, and then they're wealthy enough to buy a house in Panama, and they just move their address to Panama.
Oh, just a random country off the top of my head, Panama.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah. On the point, like you raise a good point about like it's not so easy for them to just divest from the UK economy if they get taxed. This is one of the things that I was listening to. I was listening to the Politics Joe, the podcast episode that Politics Joe did after the spring statement, and one of the presenters said that like it's not But yeah, it's not so easy to just pack up your stuff and move. Like you can't just move your assets out of like a country, especially if you're wealthy enough to hold assets. It's a
Mm-mm.
whole process, and people aren't going to do that. So like, and if you are going to do that, it's going to take a while to actually get all that paperwork done.
Yeah, I think people definitely would go through the effort of doing it. Um, but the fact that it's a lengthy process definitely means that it can't just be an overnight thing. But I do think
Mm.
that the wealthy will absolutely go through the process of um, moving or shifting assets to avoid paying for them.
Mm.
I do think that's something they do. Maybe not regularly. I don't know. I'm not super wealthy, but it's definitely not out of the question that they will move things around so they don't have to pay for them. I think that's a big part of um, taxing them and why it can be kind of difficult. But
Mm.
yeah, it's
If you,
interesting.
if,
I hadn't heard of that
yeah.
before, so I'll have to look into it a bit more. Maybe we'll revisit it next episode.
Mm. Yeah. Also, I think this is a good opportunity that if you are a millionaire, please stand up so you can be our first guest and tell us about how you avoid taxes.
Yeah, please give us all the details on all the tax you aren't paying. I promise I won't tell anyone. Yeah. Uh,
We'll keep it private, we swear.
yeah, we definitely don't, record these and post them on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so speaking of not taxing millionaires, should we move into the PIP, the PIP
Mhm.
payments or personal independence payments? I guess you wouldn't call them PIP payments, but because that is
Yeah.
so something that I want to like immediately get into, which I think most people wouldn't know because unless you've had to deal with PIP applications yourself or you know someone who has had to deal with them, um, I think Labour is intentionally making a point of lumping um, PIP in with other disability payments, but you can be working full time and still be receiving personal independence payments. They are not means based. It's to help disabled people afford accommodations, whether that's getting into work, being in work, things that they might need, just anything that helps you access work as a disabled person. PIP can be a part of that. And so, this rhetoric they have about getting people into work, but they aren't really being open and honest about the figures. And I couldn't find these figures, unfortunately, about how many people receiving PIP who are actually working. Um,
Mm.
there is this, and I think I mentioned it in our notes, the incredibly ableist rhetoric that it's implying that not working is undignified. That's the word dignity comes up in her spring statement quite a few times, and it really stuck out to me as implying that to not work is not a dignified way to live. And that's,
Mm.
I think we could just agree that that's like really disgusting. Just because you aren't working doesn't mean you are not a dignified person. That's just it's just a very strange and quite offensive way to explain people who are unable to work for one reason or another. But you
It's tying your worth to your ability to be, a productive, what they perceive to be a productive member of society, which is you you having employment of some such.
exactly. It's this when it's such it's rooted in such intense neoliberalism, which is what Thatcher was. It's what the Labour government currently is, where your like you say your self-worth is tied to how much work you are capable of doing, um, and the idea that work in the way we see it now is just what humans do. It's just the way you should be. It's what everyone should strive to, and to not do it means you're just bad with a capital B, just bad.
Mm.
And it's and then we can look at So when you look at the figures of PIP and the things that people claim, the reasons, the conditions that people claim PIP for, and I'll try not to go off on this for too long, but I do have a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. So we can see that 39% of claimants, their disabling condition falls under psychiatric disorders. Now, that's obviously only 39%, but it is by a landslide the biggest reason. So other ones such as neurological disease, sort of any other sort of cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, they all sort of 14% or lower, whereas psychiatric is that big sort of 39%. And this is data that you can find on the Gov website. These are statistics specifically from May 2019 to April 2024. I have a lot of thoughts about that. So speaking from personal experience, I do work full-time, I work from home, I do sort of generic office work, accounts specifically. And I am able to work full-time because I was able to find a fully remote job. Prior to that, I have a few things going on with me personally, few just, silly little brain disorders. We won't get into the details. But I do have autism, which is a disability. It's a developmental disability. And previously in other jobs, trying to obtain accommodations for what is considered an invisible disability, as in you wouldn't know, looking at me, you can't see that I'm disabled, is near impossible. So it doesn't surprise me that people with psychiatric disorders and disorders that you cannot visibly see make up most of the claimants, because workplaces are not equipped to accommodate those things. People generally don't understand them. Employers don't understand them. They are more often than not a very personal issue to deal with. I'm not going to talk to my manager about why I can't work today because something triggered my PTSD. Like, I'm not willing to, and I do not want to have that conversation with my manager. I just don't want to do that. That sounds like absolute nightmare fuel. So it's all well and good, saying that lots of people, on disability benefits can work, but if an employer is not equipped to provide those accommodations, then how if we think of, if we take Labour at face value with what they're saying about how some of these people can work, and they want to give them access to be able to work, you need to then have systems in place that support disabled people in work in a meaningful way. And currently, we don't have that. We have the Disability Act, which is, by law, your work has to provide reasonable accommodations upon request. But they don't have, there's nothing incentivizing them to do that. They should do it. They shouldn't have to be incentivized to help disabled people. But unfortunately, that's not really how business works. So, there are things that would have made my previous jobs easier, but my employer was unwilling and didn't know how to provide them. Mostly, they were unwilling. I didn't keep that job for a reason. But if I wasn't able to have a fully remote job, I would struggle to work. I can't, I just really struggle to. I can't do it. And it's something that people don't really understand. It's certainly something employers don't understand. People don't, there's still so much stigma around mental health. Anything that kind of falls out of the realm of, I get anxious sometimes, or I get a bit depressed sometimes, people don't know how to deal with that. So it was completely unsurprising to me that the main claimants, or the biggest individual group of claimants, were for psychiatric disorders.
Yeah, and there's a lot that's to be done with employers and how they approach these sort of things. And you'd there's 2 points I kind of want to hit on. You're going to hate the second one, just as a heads up. That employees need to be more, I guess, aware of these things and be prepared to make accommodations, or like, or even to just be not so hard on people that, like, say, like, if I'm having a particularly like depressive episode, then I would tell my managers like, "Hey, I'm not feeling too well," and then I would expect her to be like, "Okay, you can just do what you can. Let me know how it goes," um, and then yeah, and if there's like meetings and things, if there's anything that I need to like tell her that's like, I don't think I'm like prepared to handle this at the moment, then I would expect her to be a bit more accommodating and say that, okay, yeah, that's fine. We can, like, because a lot of the time you're working as part of a team, and your team is supposed to be able to, look after you. You work together, so you'd not just in like the literal sense of like, you are part, like, in you work together as part of like an organizational structure, but you're supposed to work together. And like, currently I'm currently on annual leave because I also work from home, and when you work from home, you don't use up you don't use up your annual leave as much, especially when you're me and don't go outside. Not for any particular reason. It's just my hobbies tend to be really focused on like being inside.
Yes, the
Not
best
that I'm
way.
opposed to I'm not agoraphobic. I can go outside. I just choose not to.
Same, same. That's why
Yeah.
I started podcast.
Um, so yeah. So like there's a lot of people, especially in my company, are like our annual leave resets at the end of March. So there's a lot of people going on annual leave, and there's an expectation that not really an expectation, but like well, I guess it is an expectation that currently because I'm not working in my team at the moment, and our team is like 4 people, including our manager, so it's a tiny team. So if I'm not, working at the moment because I'm on annual leave, someone else in my team is picking that up, and then when I get back, I'm not going to get yelled at to be like, oh, you put me like someone's gonna be like, you're not going to get yelled at for having to take your annual leave.
In theory, no, that should
Because,
not be happening. Yeah.
yeah, like so your colleagues, like the people that you work with in your team, should not be putting it on you for going on holiday.
Yeah,
It should
exactly.
be,
That's thanks to unions, we
yeah,
have that. Yeah.
yeah, and like your managers should be like setting up your team in a way that like if one person is away, someone else is equipped to be able to handle those tasks. Like the in my work, I'm a data engineer, so all of my things are automated. But the thing with automation is that somebody, even though it's running automatically and like kind of running in the background because of a cloud service, somebody still has to watch it,
Mm.
especially because the data that relies on, or that the data that it relies on that process working is like feeding into reports and things, then somebody has to watch it to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so that falls on my colleagues. And so like before I went on annual leave, I told them that like, hey, this is how this thing works. This is what I expect. It's been running for like a week on its own right now without any intervention from me. So so from my perspective, it's fine. But if anything goes wrong, you can just disable it. You can disable it this way, and then here's a thing you can use. Here's a little Python script you can run to manually kind of deal with it. Basically, I just give them like anything that they need. That if anything should go wrong with anything that I worked on, they have the ability to handle it without me having to open up my laptop during manual leave. And
Yeah.
these are the
Yeah.
things. these are like components of like a workspace that understands that people have stuff going on, and when you go on annual leave, your employer has to make those accommodations that like even if you're not like even if you're perfectly able-bodied, your manager has to make accommodations. They have to, and it's just part of being in a workplace that's like you have to go on annual leave, you go sick, you stuff happens. Um, People have lives outside of work, and this is a fundamental flaw that I think Labour have in that they seem to think that people don't have anything going on aside from work, and that if you're not working, then you have nothing going on,
Yeah, I mean,
which is
it's
very
it's
destructive.
it's so very. I don't know if it's because I'm reading a lot about neoliberalism at the moment, but it just seems so
Mm,
it's so prevalent that this sort of work focused way that we live, um, and probably why they feel um, like they need to push people who struggle to work into work.
mm,
One thing there is only one thing about the sort of new welfare, not the welfare cuts, but they're introducing what is called the right to try. Now,
mm-hmm,
I haven't been super involved in what's going on with disability benefits for quite some time, but many years back, I'm talking like 7 or 8 years ago, I knew someone who was unable to work due to lots of comorbid mental health issues. And if you, it's a horrible system anyway, the benefits assessment system, for reasons that I'll get into. But if you are, under the current system, punished for attempting to work, and so the right to try, Labour are saying that if you try to work and are unable to, that this will not affect your ability to then claim further disability benefits. As they sell it on paper, I like that idea. Whether or not it will be used in the way they're explaining it is a completely different story. It could just as easily be weaponized as, well, you can still try to work. You won't get penalized. You should just try. That rhetoric could very quickly and very easily be used against disabled people. But on paper,
mm,
the right to try seems like a good idea. Um, However, the disability benefits as I know them, specifically PIP, when you are attempting to claim that and you are doing your assessments, especially reassessments, I've heard that this is quite prevalent. You are, what's the word I'm looking for? Evaluated on things that are that would seem like they are outside of the assessment. For example, you are able to physically get to your appointment. That's a bit strange. Like it's literally the attitude of, you mean you could leave the house to get to an appointment? Not very disabled then, which is crazy. The idea that you would not like that like this appointment that you have to go to, because if you don't show up, you will lose your ability to pay for things that you need, like housing and food and your disability aids, would then be used against you in the access to those benefits is crazy. But that is something that I have heard anecdotally from a lot of people, that you are treated with a lot of suspicion for being able to function at all. And I think that comes from the complete misunderstanding people have of disability, that they seem to view disability as a very binary thing where you are either completely disabled all the time or you aren't actually disabled, which almost any person living with chronic pain, chronic illnesses, or just any so many disabilities, disorders, illnesses fluctuate so massively that any person who has ever dealt with that sort of thing will tell you that it can change so severely from day to day, which, of itself also makes work very difficult because employers don't have patience for that kind of thing.
So so I have a further two things.
Okay.
We can talk about the access to work scheme. I think that's a pretty good one. So the DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions, it's not like they don't have frameworks to help disabled people. The access to work scheme that they have is supposed to be. So if I just read here, this is from Big Issue, who were talking about it, is to avoid disabled people having to shoulder additional costs and to avoid employers discriminating against disabled people so they don't have to pay for accommodations. Access to work is a government scheme designed to enable disabled people to start working, stay in work, or become self-employed, and it's funding workplace adaptation, specialist equipment, support workers, travel assistance, and various other things. And the key point I want to focus on here is the last line in our notes, which says it's increasingly not fit for purpose, with excessive waiting times being a key barrier for applicants. So the framework is here for getting more disabled people into work. It's just like with a lot of things in government, they just aren't getting any attention.
Yeah.
And Labour's doing the I guess the Thatcherist strategy of just like, you know, if we just cut things, it will force people to, you know, if we make people desperate enough, then they will, in theory, get off their asses and be productive members of society, which is a horrific sort of sentiment to have.
Yeah, it is. It's basically such a like it's yeah, exactly what you've said, really. Just if we make people's conditions worse, if we make their conditions bad enough, then they will push themselves beyond their limit into an early grave just so they can afford to live. That's kind of the reality that we're looking at, because I I get it because I've done it myself. I've pushed myself way beyond what I'm capable of, because I've needed to. The situation called for it. I didn't know I was disabled for quite a while of my life until I realised that constantly pushing myself beyond my means would send me into what was quite a horrible time in my early 20s. And that's kind of just what they're pushing disabled people towards, the idea that as long as you can work, even if it's harder for you than everyone else, the important thing is that you work. And I just don't agree with it, with focusing your life around work. Some people do, and they get a great deal of fulfillment out of it, and that's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but the idea that we should expect that from everyone is it's just a bit crazy to me. But
So on to my second point. You're gonna hate this. So there's this talking point, and I've kind of seen it a few times now, and it's come up in sort of like, I guess, discussions on Reddit, because very yeah. So Reddit being a place on the internet. So there's this. So people will see this 39% like assessments thing for the PIP, and they're gonna the talking point is that people will see that and think, people are claiming psychiatric disorders because those are easier to claim in regards to getting benefit.
right.
That's the kind of thing that I've started seeing.
You are right. I do hate that. I hate that a lot. Yeah, I mean, so let me try and make this point concise before I just start talking. To claim benefits for, or PIP specifically for, a psychiatric disorder is not as simple as just rolling up to a doctor's office and being like, Hey, I feel kind of anxious sometimes. It's the the mental health facilities in this country are, I mean, the NHS is crippled, but also the mental health facilities aren't good. I think a few months ago, um, the whole of Manchester, uh, specifically their mental health nurses, all went on strike because there is nothing to provide care consistently or well or at all. There used to be, and over the years of Conservative government, they've all been sort of slashed. And so what they're stuck with now is a very long waiting list for like a community care nurse kind of situation, which there aren't enough of. Or if it's crisis, you just get sent to A&E, and A&E is not equipped to deal. I mean, they have processes in place, but realistically, they're not equipped to deal with people in mental health crises, which is usually, you know, suicidal ideation, thoughts of that sort of thing, intending to take action, intense self harm, psychosis, when crisis point, when things get really, really bad.
Hmm.
And so I think people who argue that people claim psychiatric disorders because it's quote unquote easier um, just probably don't understand really the lengths that you have to go to get um, any sort of meaningful help from the NHS, specifically a diagnosis, which I am almost certain you probably would need before you can claim any benefits for it. And maybe I'm wrong there, but it's it's really just not that simple. And with the
Hmm.
NHS being so unwilling to help, unwilling is actually maybe the wrong word, unable to help, um,
Hmm.
the I see the logic behind that talking point, but the logic and understanding of how the NHS functions with psychiatric disorders just seems very just wrong, basically. It's just
Hmm.
wrong.
Yeah, it's. I think it's a rhetoric that I think is kind of based in. I want to say It's kind of discompassionate.
Oh,
Um, because it's like these things don't just exist in isolation. When we've had this 14 years of Tory government, and then we've been witnessing the NHS being slowly siphoned off, the funds for the NHS being slowly siphoned off, the NHS getting more and more desperate, and thus having to do these sort of cost cutting measures. They can only focus on like the most, I guess, extreme cases they can handle.
mm,
Obviously like childcare being like they're going to prioritize childcare and elderly care, and then any other like emergencies that they're equipped to deal with, they're going to start focusing on those because they don't have, like, this was the thing with the something came out where the NHS couldn't subsidize like HRT anymore,
mm,
and it's a cost cutting thing that they basically can't afford it, and wire and HRT being like, it's an important thing, but it's an important thing for like a small subset of the population, and it gets to a point where they have to cut off these parts that they can't afford because it just ends up they just don't have the financial ability to support them. And you end up with, like, trans people leading to suicidal ideation, getting more desperate people, um, the as the working class and middle class start. This is what Gary Stevenson calls the squeeze out, based on the video that he released 7 hours ago or 8 hours ago since we started this. He calls the squeeze out, and so because the working class, because they get their finances becoming more and more, well, squeezed as the their situations, their financial situations basically start to drain them of funds then they become more desperate. That affects their mental health. That then puts them in desperate situations of like, okay, they have to claim. Well, they basically have to go for like psychiatric disorders, whether the as in claiming for psychiatric disorders, because they're in rough situations, whether they get it or not. Does it like it can help, but it may not be enough. That stress is a big thing. When I was in high school, uh, I think we were looking at the psychological effects of stress during like my psychology. Was it GCSE? I think it was GCSE. Basically, stress. Um, you can have pretty extreme reactions to stress, and it can be something small to like something I do when I get stressed is I tend to overeat on sugar. So
Mm.
chocolate, like when I get stressed out, I crave sugar. And it's incredibly damaging. I feel like terror. I feel like shit afterwards. But in the moment of stress, that craving for sugar puts me in a position that it basically puts it. I basically sacrifice health for like a small um, dopamine boost, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's and that's like sugar itself being like a sort of drug. You can then just replace that with any other drug that people can take, whether it be like something relatively harmless like weed to getting a bit more dangerous into like class A drugs, and then people being put into situations where they're like risking their own health for even to try and cope with very stressful situations with that they've been put in financially. Those deaths that basically puts a strain on the NHS eventually, because if you're risking your health, eventually you're going to be put into a health crisis, and the NHS has to deal with it. These things are a vicious cycle. Is it a vicious cycle?
It's
They're
definitely,
all.
yeah, I was gonna say it's definitely not happening in a vacuum. They all feed into one another. Um, and I think people do that just sort of with capitalism generally. I know it's the first episode and I've already broken out the word capitalism. But it's not all these individual problems that people then try to stamp out the individual problem, but they do not treat the root of the problem. I think is maybe sort of what you're getting at. Like the another reason why psychiatric disorders are so high is because the expectations of the workplace have generally increased so much. And I don't think that that's particularly good for many people, disabled or otherwise. I don't think that work should be um, made to take up so much of people's lives. Um, and when it takes up a lot of your life, at least in the areas I have worked, it seems to be praised. It's like, oh, you went above and beyond and you think about work even when you're not in work, and that's what makes you a good employee. And I find that that's it's just asking for eventual burnout.
Yeah.
Whether you enjoy your job or not, everybody needs time away from it. And I think the also the push to kind of turn everything you love into a source of income. Like, oh, you like gaming, you should stream, and maybe you'll make a career out of that. Oh, you love
You're like rambling about politics. You should start a podcast.
don't know why you would draw that conclusion. But like
Oh yeah,
also
where did we get that
I know, right? Crazy. That just came out of the ether. But even like I'm into crafts. I have friends who do craft stuff and it's like, "Oh,
from?
you should sell your crochet stuff," or "Oh, you should if you like baking, you should take like orders for like wedding cakes." And it's like, "No, you can just enjoy things."
Yeah. It's like once people see that you do something for fun, their immediate suggestion is, why don't you sell that labor? And it's like, I don't want to.
Right?
I paint like Warhammer minis not because I want to sell them. I paint them because I want to paint them. I want to paint them because I want to, like, if I'm working and I don't feel like working, I will paint my minis because I don't want to work. I don't want to then switch from like one form of labor to another form of labor
Yeah.
because that's I don't yeah, it's like I don't want to turn everything hobbies into like side hustle because that basically removes like any sort of incentive of like you basically just move from like one workplace to another and you don't have any sort of downtime and it's an awful it's a weird mindset people have. I often have to argue with my mum about like if I don't want to go out because I'm not a very social person. I like you know like being at the reason why we're not doing this person is because we're both not like we don't go outside that much.
Yeah,
So,
also,
like my
any idea how expensive it would be to get to you? You're on the other side of the country. I don't
yeah.
have that kind of money. I'm living in the British economy.
Oh yeah, like oh man, trains is a whole other thing.
The whole
Man, there's
thing.
so much. There is so much we could talk about
Oh,
regarding this
yes.
country. Um, but it's like yeah, you can't. Um, what's it called? Like yeah, sometimes I just don't want to see people. I don't like people. I don't like hanging out with. I don't like talking to people that much that I'm like, oh yeah, let me spend like a couple hours. Like last night, we went to somebody's house for like they were celebrating anniversaries and birthdays there as well. So then I went there and stuff, and I agreed with my mom that like yeah, I'm gonna take my car, but the expectation is, and like she told me as well, it's like oh yeah, when you want to go, you can just like go home and you can take your brother-in-law and his kid uh with you home, and I was like okay yeah sure. Because basically, I just like the thing I like about having my own car is that I can leave whenever I want. So if I've had enough, and I often do get into the situation where like some like if I don't want to spend like more than 2 hours away from home because I get anxious. I get really anxious when I'm not at home, and it's just like a social thing of like I don't it kind of depends on what I'm doing as well. But it's like if it's a purely social thing of like oh if I'm having a dinner at someone's house with like there's like 50 people all around and stuff and they're all talking and stuff, I get really anxious.
That many
And
people.
and
It's awful.
yeah, yeah, and as well as the other thing of like I can't really nobody paints Warhammer minis. I can't really talk about Warhammer with anyone. I know this is a very specific thing that I've just randomly picked up, but I was just talking about the minis before. It's like I can't talk to anyone about Warhammer. I can show them like, oh yeah, this is the thing I do. But that's like, you know what? That's like a 10-second thing of like, this is what I've been doing with my time. They're like, oh yeah, cool. There's a couple nods, and then the next question will be like, oh yeah, how's work going? It's like, okay.
You are the meme of the guy stood in the corner like nobody knows I paint Warhammer minis.
Yeah, and I'm just like standing there with my drink, and then eventually I'm like, I'm going home.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate that I live with my partner, obviously,
Mm,
and I have a very small, close knit circle of friends who are very understanding. But outside of that, I do I just really struggle, and I think it's a part of why I disliked being in an office so much. And then this kind of goes back to sort of providing workplace accommodations for people with invisible
mm,
disabilities. I There are just things, and this isn't to say that accommodation shouldn't be provided, but if we, the reality is there are some things that you just can't accommodate for. Like, no one can accommodate for the fact that I do not handle unprompted small talk particularly well. And it's not that, like, it makes me uncomfortable or I find it kind of irritating. It's that my brain processes things very slowly, and if I'm in the middle of something and you come up to me and start talking to me, I
Mm.
can't converse with you because my brain is like struggling to like task switch. So I've not like my brain's not processing properly. Um but like how do you accommodate for that in an office? Just like, oh yeah, that's them in the corner. You can't speak to them. Like what you can't like
Mm.
that's crazy. Like, you know, I have like certain triggers that are like really weird and specific, but like can come up really easily. So like in what universe can a workplace accommodate for that? They can't. The accommodation they should have given me was letting me work from home permanently because then I can control my environment. That's the accommodation that I need. I need to generally be in control of my environment. Um,
Mm.
but you know, it's I've completely lost the point that I was making. But but no, it's totally gone. It's yeah. But I guess I'm just salty that they wouldn't let me work from home. But the
Mm.
another anecdote I do have from that workplace, and this is genuinely really awful. I found out about this when I was in the process of trying to find a different job. So at that workplace, I was part of a voluntary committee that was meant to be improving. Are you ready for the buzzword? DEI regulations in the company.
Oh no, the boogeyman.
Oh no, I've provoked people who hate equality. Um, and there was an incident where a job was offered to a potential candidate. That candidate then disclosed that they had a invisible disability. I don't know what it was. I don't know which manager this was. That information was not provided to me. But upon finding this out, the manager in earnest asked, "Can we rescind this job offer?" Which is just awful. But like that, like
Mm.
there's so like employers don't want to and don't know how to accommodate for these things, and that has to be taken into consideration when you're talking about pushing disabled people into the workplace. Like you can't like there has to like it just I don't know the laws of there has to be like an equal and opposite. Like you can't do something and not like there is an effect. If you do something, there will be a knock-on effect of that. Nothing exists in a vacuum. You can't just push people into work and have no onus put on employers to ensure that those accommodations are in place because it's so easy for them not to be. For example, a lot there's occupational health is a buzzword that gets brought up if you've ever had the joys of working with a HR department and you have mental health issues or you are having trouble with work, you will have the joys of dealing with occupational health. And it's usually a unrelated third party that your employer will get involved. They are not obligated, your employer is not obligated to actually take the advice of an occupational health professional. They're basically
Mm.
just there to advise, and they can and most likely will be completely ignored. It's I've I've dealt with a few places where I've worked where I've needed accommodations, although I've not always understood that that was the language I should have been using, and I've never once had a good experience. Um, I just don't believe that workplaces are equipped to help with that. And that brings it back around to the point you make of being in a workplace that doesn't accommodate you makes you worse and worse and worse over time to the point where you are unable to work. You then get put into a benefit system that isn't really helping, but wants you to get back in work, but won't help you to get back in work when it was work that made you sick. And it's just, it is, like you say, just a vicious cycle.
Mm. Yeah. Uh, this wasn't to do with disability, but like when in my previous job, um, I was in it, I think for 2 years, and then it was COVID. COVID happened, and when so then we all started working from home with laptops and stuff. Um, and then this was when like the company obviously had to shift because they did conferences. So it was in person conferences. They would organize these events, and then after COVID, they had to switch to webinars. The problem occurred was that now there was more webinars. So like usually you would have a um, a conference like every 1 or 2 months, and it would be like in different regions of like of the world, basically different regions of the world, and then they have like the various teams that would organize and handle them. Um, so then when they switched to webinars, there was like a webinar like every 2 weeks or something. It was getting really intense, and being the part of the team that was having to manage the data that then needs to be sent out to partners and stuff every 2 weeks, you basically have to get into this workflow of basically pumping out data, and this was a role purported to be like for analysts. So we basically didn't have enough time to analyze the data, and for me, I get kind of annoyed at that because it's like I'm supposed to be analyzing data, but I'm just processing. I'm just endlessly like but getting this data, putting it into a spreadsheet, and then sending the spreadsheet off. And you get into this cycle of doing this day in day out, and on top of that, the my manager at the time was imposing this sort of pathological response, and I didn't realize this until I switched companies that every morning at 9 a.m. you have to put a message you have to say good morning in the chat,
Ugh.
and if you don't, the manager might message my manager would message asking like, "Oh, is everything okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, everything's fine." And um, so you basically have to show that you're working, like you're physically at the desk.
Yeah.
Basically, what I'm saying is, I burned out. Just eventually, um, I got so into this like routine of processing data, not really having the time to think about what I'm doing, overwhelmed with this thing, not really supported by my manager or like the wider company in any way to actually be able to handle this workload. Um, and then basically just not having the, I guess, mental capacity to even like in, to even be like enthusiastic about the job that I'm doing. And naturally, I started looking for another job, and then boy howdy, did the next company was like even better. That's the company I'm with now, and they have a lot more open um policy about like dealing with people, and then the I'm glad to be part of a company right now that's a bit more accommodating. But it was this it was just like the stark contrast of like a company that's focused on getting more work out of you, as opposed to the company that I work for now that was enabling an environment that allows you to work.
Yeah. Like that kind of it's interesting that working in companies that have that sort of atmosphere kind of um leads me into when I was looking at the figures on where have they gone? About the work that's actually available. So when
Mm.
Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party talks about pushing more people into work, you have to ask the question, how many jobs are actually available? So I think one of the ones I linked, the labour market overview, there was roughly 1.9 unemployed people per available vacancy. And you would hear that and think, well, that's like 2 people per available vacancy. Like statistically, that doesn't sound that bad. But that's
Mm.
only unemployed people. And so many people looking for a job are not unemployed. And um, I think it's disingenuous to use those figures because we don't really have any idea of how many people are stuck in jobs, one, that are making them stressed and ill and unable to work because there aren't jobs available. Companies are massively incentivized to have as little staff as possible. And then when you tie in labor pushing AI and streamlining workflows, which means not hiring people, that's what that means. And they're talking
Mm.
about efficiency, which again is just about where can I replace my staff with AI, and companies are really looking to do that because AI is free labor. Um, you're pushing people who can't work into a job market that doesn't even have enough jobs. It's just, I don't know. It just seems so strange. It just seems strange to me that it just seems so unthought, unthought through to just ever. It's one of those
Mm.
things where the more I think about it, the more I'm like, did nobody look over this? Did nobody double check this? Did nobody think about the wider implications of what pushing sick people into a workforce with not a lot of jobs will do? It's just very strange.
Okay, I wanna hit on this like government efficiency thing that they started doing with AI,
Yeah.
and I feel like this is off the back of Dharma having spoken with Trump and already having this like pro AI mindset. Um, so they're doing this thing where they want to use, I guess, AI to streamline processes in government and presumably to, I mean, they're already shrinking the size of the civil service. Uh, so here's the thing about efficiency, right? And this kind of goes into hiring people instead of using these bots.
Mm.
A a, a data analyst can help you find inefficiencies, and like a data analyst, like one guy who can operate a spreadsheet, with some degree of proficiency. Probably me after I've graduated, after I've had either a year or 2 years of experience of data analysis. So really, not really, it's not that much experience at all, but someone who has that proficiency. If you hire that person, they can find your efficiencies with a spreadsheet. It doesn't require this, you don't need an algorithm to do it for you. It, I get that it's like, oh yeah, you have to go through the process of hiring the person, and then you have to pay them, and then there's like a whole process involved in it. But that person, if you listen to them, and then they can help you nail down what exactly are like the inefficiencies a lot quicker than like an algorithm would. An algorithm is only as good as the people who can interpret its results, and it's a lot easier to speak with a person than try to you know deal with an algorithm.
Yeah.
And it's and it's insane to me that it's like these people are out there. Like there are grads who probably aren't proficient in data analysis, but they probably have those skills to do it. Like I didn't realize I had the skills until I started, um, until I did a placement year after my second year of uni. So I was working at a pharma company as an analyst. I didn't realize I was good. I would be good at data analysis until I started doing it. It's it's one of those things that like you have the skills, but you don't have the experience. And this also kind of feeds into the aspect of employment in that it's a lot the hardest part or like the hardest time for you to get a job is your first job, because when you don't have experience, you you basically have to be looking for an employer who's willing to train you. And that's why like it was easier for me to find my second job, because I already had the skills that they were looking for. When you don't have those skills, when you haven't worked on like all the application and the programs that I've dealt with, learning Python and the like, then if you haven't been dealing with that, then you're less employable.
Yeah.
And if you're a grad who's just come out of uni, and you didn't take a placement year, and this is a knock to uni students who don't take a placement year. Often, like my uni at the time were like heavily pushing a placement year. Sometimes your uni just won't do it. If you don't know that that's something you could do, then you might just all you have is like a roll of paper that says you've got like a master's or bachelor's or whatever. Um, and then you get into the job market and they're like, oh, you need 2 years experience doing like, using Google BigQuery or like Snowflake or something. And you've just spent the last 4 years doing, I don't know, mechanical engineering or maths as I did. Um, and it's like, how do you deal with that when, like, how do you break into a job market that isn't prepared to take you on? Yeah, there's a lot of things that feed into this, and the government efficiency thing of like I get that the finance thing, they're like heavily focused on cutting cost and stuff, and a lot of Rachel Reeves has been hitting back on like the welfare costs. A lot of the rebuttal that she gives, or I said the rebuttal, the defense that she gives for these welfare cuts is that they've been investing heavily into other things. They've been investing and that isn't to say those investments aren't good. It's just that you're not. It's like you have to invest in the right things, and putting 100 billion in one place, or I think it was like 20 billion to the NHS, and like that's a good thing, but the other issue is like the access to work scheme that isn't properly equipped. When you have schemes that aren't equipped civil servants who aren't getting the support they need, and they'll probably be made redundant because they like, oh, this department hasn't been like if a government department hasn't been justifying their existence in the government by putting out results when really they just don't have the support to do so, then all that results in you cut the civil service, you cut the public's, you cut the support that people have, like say the access to work scheme,
Mm.
despite it not being fit for purpose. If it was cut out, like if you just sack the team that was managing it because it's not doing as well as you would like, then whoever was using the access to work scheme, they have no support basically. And that would be like disabled people as well.
Yeah.
And you just remove another pillar, or you just remove another thing that people have to lean on for government support. And it's primarily because you just, oh yeah, let's put like 1 billion into AI when you could just look at what you already have at the moment and then try to improve those.
Yeah, which is like it's exactly what Thatcher would have done. Like Thatcher would
Mm,
have loved AI.
yeah. Oh, it's this. I don't understand this sort of mentality. I guess this is like a thing that neoliberals tend to do, which is they will cut what they have and try to grab something else. They'll try to get something else to solve a problem when the thing that they have could have just like a lot of the things with with governments and like the US as well. What people have been finding out is that your government has a lot of things that it needs to support you. A lot of these things exist. They just don't get any attention from like, fiscally, financially, they don't get any support. And that's why you don't really see things that's why you don't get, what am I trying to say? They, you're not seeing that support because that support isn't getting what it needs. and so you're not getting what you need because of it. And it's this aspect of like, well, like I get the government has to be more efficient, but you also have to review the government and see like, well, where is your money going? And obviously, with the Tory government that we had for the last 14 years, they will invest in things like, was it the HS2? They were they were supposed to sort out that rail line that never got done.
Yeah.
They had a whole lot of programs they claimed to be working on, that they made a lot of claims and they just didn't follow through on any of them, and that's like contributing to the £22 billion black hole that Labour and it's like Starmer and Reeves keep trotting about.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that the Conservatives were putting money into things that didn't have any return because they either didn't foresee them having a return or they just didn't manage the project properly. When all the time that the NHS was there, NHS England. Oh right, yeah, the Quango shit. That's another thing.
Oh god, yeah.
I'll table that for like another episode. Um, the Yeah, like a lot of these things exist in the government already, and they could just work. Like the government can work if they allow it to.
So I'm just looking through the outline. I think I unmuted myself, right? Yes, yes, yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, making sure. Um, so I think we've mostly covered everything. One thing that I did want to touch on that was sort of talked about a lot in the spring statement, and I think we or sort of briefly talked about it when like the day of the spring statement, is
Mhm.
this sort of push for more housing, which is a good thing, I think. We do definitely need more housing, but the issue, and I think I said this at the time, is there is the house costs are just so insane. So there are things you can do to bring that down. One is building more houses. More houses mean that houses will be cheaper if there's more of them. It drives down housing costs, but I don't think they will do it enough to make houses affordable. So I think we'll probably see an increase in rich people buying more houses, but I don't think that's ever gonna trickle down. I don't think it will actually help the issue with housing. I don't think it'll help the fact that people can't afford to buy a house anymore. Um, I and it kind of ties into the growth that the Labour Party say will happen over the next 4 to 5 years. And
Mhm.
I think the OBR is basically like, are you sure about that? Because they don't think that's gonna happen. I think if we build more houses but don't um, make any kind of meaningful impact on the cost of living to everyday people, it won't matter that you build however many million new homes if the only people that can afford them are people who already have huge amounts of wealth. I think looking at the growth, um, although I have lost it in the notes now.
Yeah, just on the aspect of like it takes a lot longer to build a house or to build like a row of houses and then put them on the market than it is to actually just buy them.
Yeah, and something else as well. So one of my first jobs was actually working in social housing.
Mm.
And social housing currently still has something that Thatcher introduced, which is called the right to buy. So when you live in social housing, you live in a council house, you can at some point, usually not immediately. I think the amount of time you have to wait varies from council to council or um, housing association to housing association. But you can buy that house for, I think it's like 1 or 2/3 of the market cost. And the right to buy on paper sounds very good as a short term issue, but it has, however, put social housing in a situation where it is not um, financially viable for them to build more houses because they'll just get bought for less than they are worth eventually.
Hmm.
So it's building assets that you will eventually get paid nothing for. And although this sounds kind of controversial, I do think we should sack off the right to buy, and I think that will make social housing a lot more viable for housing associations. Because it's at that point, it's just I think it was good as a short term solution, but I think it has now caused more issues than it is helping. I
Hmm.
think we should look at getting rid of the right to buy. Personally, just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, it's feel like the solution of like build more houses to deal with the low supply and high demand is kind of akin to like let's build more lanes in this motorway and hope it will decrease traffic.
Yeah, yeah, it's not great. I don't see the point in building lots of houses when no one can afford to buy them. It just seems
Yeah.
it just seems very foolish to me. I think we should look at um reinvesting in social housing, getting rid of the right to buy. Social housing is, it's great, and I wish it was a sector that I had stayed in. Mainly just out of like curiosity and because I worked in logistics and that was very fun. Um, but where I was at the time was a town that was I don't live there anymore, but it was basically huge. It was a huge mining town, and so it's economically dead now. That town is like this. It's kind of a ghost town. And so there's a lot of people there who really depend on things like social housing. And
Mm.
it's worrying to see those services sort of decay even further and be sort of um what's the opposite of incentivized? Come on, brain.
Disincentivize.
Is it that I thought that? I was like, I think
Okay.
that sounded right. But yeah, basically disincentivized to continue to grow to provide that service. But instead we're just gonna build a bunch of houses, and what was I reading that said that like a huge portion of them will have to be under the affordable housing scheme for it to even be in any way meaningful for the people who are trying to buy a house, and it won't be because that's just not that's not what Labour's going to do.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's something that Gary Stevenson says, or one of the things he talks about, which is that like the housing market is a competition, especially nowadays, where it is a competition, and you're not just competing with other people trying to buy a house. You're compete. It's your incomes are competing,
Mm.
and it's your budget versus somebody else's. And when you're working and stuff, your budget can only be so high, and then you're competing with someone who probably owns like multiple houses and thus has the ability to put them on rent, and then make money. There's these people, these fucking parasites who who believe that landlord is some sort of employment.
Yes,
Um,
yeah. I saw
they
an interview clip where a landlord said that he preferred to be called a housing provider, and it's like, okay, mate, get in the sea.
I would prefer that you weren't standing.
Yeah, but
Uh,
oh god,
yeah,
landlords, it's a whole separate thing.
yeah. Oh man, I was ranting to someone because he sent me a video of this guy who's talking about like I think it was some Canadian developer who bought like 10,000 houses and it made my
Jesus.
skin crawl. I genuinely wanted to strangle someone. Well, specifically him. I wanted to reach through my screen and strangle him. But anyway, but yeah, you're competing with rich people and they who can just buy the houses outright, and it's like, well, there's no you're gonna lose. You're just gonna lose because the
Yeah.
the cards are stacked against you. You don't when you have so little cards to play, then you're not gonna win. This is I highly recommend people play Monopoly. Now so this board game isn't really so much as a game as it's a lesson, and which is why like when you play it, initially you're gonna have fun, and then you're slowly not gonna have fun, and it's kind of how the game is designed. Have you ever played Monopoly
So
to its
many. I've
completion?
regretted it every time. I hate Monopoly with a burning passion.
Yeah, and but it's such a good illustration of how it works. Where like when there's a lot of assets but not a lot of players, or at least not a lot of owners, then it's fun. Everyone is buying, and then nobody's competing. But once people start to fill up the board, then things start to get a bit more dicey, where you have to start making deals, and eventually you start to realize that if you have more assets, then it's a lot easier for you to get assets. It's a lot easier for you to squeeze people to put people into you can basically give them deals that disadvantage themselves, or either that like gives you an advantage but has no seeming advantage to them.
Yeah.
And it's a whole thing of like you basically stack the deck in your favor, and the game slowly goes from relatively fun as like everyone buying to becoming miserable.
Oh, yeah.
And you will hate the people around you, like you will hate the people you're playing with, and but it's it is the game itself has um is representing a system where that in that advantages the rich being richer,
Yeah.
and the way they get richer is by squeezing the poor.
Yeah, exactly. On a sort of on a micro level, when I was trying to buy my first house, the amount of times we put an offer in, um, and we would be out by a cash buyer, and a cash buyer is 9 times out of 10 always a landlord.
Mm.
And it's like, and the rent versus mortgage cost is just so astronomical. I obviously, for the past nearly 4 years, haven't looked at rent costs because I've managed to buy a house. I don't need to think about rent costs. And sort of, I was curious as to what they were, sort of getting ready for this podcast, and it's insane. I remember when I was 21, oh God, you're not gonna believe this, especially because you have a higher cost of living where you are. But when I
Mm.
was 21, I moved out by myself for the first time into like a little one-bedroom flat, perfect for one person. It was quite nice actually. How much do you think I paid a month for that one-bedroom flat, if you had to guess?
1,200.
No, this was when I was 21, so this would have been 2016.
um 700.
You're not going to like this. Are you ready? I paid
Mm.
295 a month.
What?
I know it used to be affordable. It used to be affordable to rent, and now I spoke to a friend of mine, who rents, and they have a good job. Like, one that you would think would make life pretty affordable without disclosing their information. And they've got like a 3 bedroom terraced house. Bear in mind, I live in the northwest where the cost of living is not that high, and it's like nearly $1,000 a month, and it's crazy to me.
Jeez.
And it's just like, and I guess maybe for some parts of the country that doesn't sound like very much, but for here, uh, to juxtapose that, when I moved out of that little 1 bedroom flat that was 295 a month, I then moved into a 2 bedroom house which was only 450, which is around the average at that time. So in the last like 6 years, it's nearly doubled, which is crazy, but wages haven't done anything to compensate for that jump in rent.
Mm.
And my mortgage payments, and I also now, for context, live in a 3 bedroom terrace. My mortgage payments were a lot less than £1,000 a month. So it just makes me like, to contextualize the profit that a landlord is making on rent when you can mortgage your house that you currently rent for maybe like half of what like you're paying in rent would be your mortgage roughly. It's just, I fucking hate landlords. I once had a
Yeah.
landlord complain to me how stressful it was having 2 mortgages. Like, but I'm paying one of them. What do you mean? Oh god, she was awful as well. But yeah, 295 a month for a 1 bedroom flat. That was, those are the times.
Like 2016. I think we're around about the same age. Um, so in 2016, that was during when I was in the placement year. I was working in Guildford, and so I was looking for a place to live in Guildford. Guess how much the rent would have been in a shared space?
Yeah. Oh, in a shared space. I don't know, man. Like prices as they get closer to London absolutely blow my mind. So,
Mm,
um, so like, was this like a room in a shared house?
yeah, yeah,
2016.
shared rental space.
Uh,
Uh,
where's Guildford? Hold on. My geography skills are
sorry.
poor.
Uh, is it to the west of London?
Uh,
Oh, by the way, when people say London, this is for anyone who either lives so far north that they don't even care. Um, but the central London, which is what typically people call London, but there's like a whole suburban, there's a ring of like suburbs that goes around central London, which is also London that people tend to forget is also part of London. I sometimes forget what is part of London. And my barometer for this is anything that's on the tube map is part of London.
yeah. Oh, man, I don't know. I'm not good at guessing games like at all, but if I would imagine in a shared house in 2016, Guildford, it's kind of close to London. I imagine is it commutable to London from there?
Yeah, you can take a national rail line. It's about an hour to
Ooh,
Waterloo.
okay. Uh, oh God, I don't know if 2016. I actually, I'm not confident in guessing. I'm just gonna make you tell me. I hate guessing.
Okay. So the one I found that I was very close to getting, I think 700.
What the fuck? That's
Yeah,
crazy for a room.
for a room, yeah, in a shared space. And bearing in mind, I was just above, I think just above the tax-free allowance. So I mean, this was 2016. It was during my placement year. The entire year, my yearly salary was 18,000. And I was also spending like what £300 like a month getting to like commuting down to
Yeah.
Guildford. you had to take the tube to Waterloo and then a national rail to Guildford. And let me tell you, national rail is not cheap.
Oh god, it's really not. Don't get. Oh my god, don't even get me started. I have to pay a
Yeah,
fortune just to like get into Liverpool. And I'm not
yeah,
that far from Liverpool. Um, well, actually, I'm further than I thought. Actually, but yeah, it's like just for a trip that can be done in like an hour, it should not be getting on for like 30 quid. That's insane. It's just crazy.
yeah.
But
This is why we need to do another episode on trains because man, the national rail,
yeah, I feel
what
like
a travesty.
I feel like we are devolving into just complaining about the cost of things. I
Yeah,
don't.
well, this is what happens when two Brits start talking to each other. Eventually, it just devolves into complaints. Um,
It's just what we
okay,
get.
but yeah, so 700 for like that little shared space
Oh
in Guildford,
God,
which isn't even in London,
I was
and for
gonna,
students, there were students in that flat
oh my God, I was gonna
in
guess
that
like
house.
500, but then I was like, no, in 2016, that's crazy. That's not gonna be that much.
No, no,
Oh
that was it.
my God, a sweet summer child. Good
Yeah.
God, yeah. So there are a lot of advantages to living up north. You're missing out. I can
Yeah.
afford to, live. It's nice.
Oh yeah, I'm glad to like I earn more than I used to, like
Mm.
in the previous jobs that I had. So I've I mean this is the second company, third if you count my placement year, that I've worked for, and I work less than I used to, but I earn more. I know
Yeah,
this sounds very privileged to say, but it's kind of the nature of like this is the nature of like a company that values your labor. And again, I'm not trying to demean people in like where they work, but this is like the place where I work is what I want other places of work to be, and I wish
yeah,
other places of work. It's like I would have wished that the place I worked at when I left uni was like the place where I'm at now because they're taking grads as well.
yeah,
Um, and it's like it's a place that tries to promote like a healthy environment. Um, and as well, like it gets a bit. I mean, the more you earn, the more politics you have to deal with, which I'm glad to like my manager handles that side of it
yeah,
more than I do. Um, but it's like these we want companies to have these ideals, but that it's not just up to the you basically want a company to want to have to do this because if if they want they basically have to be convinced that if you support people, if you give people allowances, if you give people room to breathe, then they can deliver.
yeah. I mean, it's I don't know whether I'll ever get him on the podcast, but my partner is a manager where he works, and
Mm.
lucky for the people who work for him, he's been a leftist his entire life, so he's all for good working conditions. And he's um constantly driving home the point that it is infinitely cheaper to keep the staff you have and spend by making them happy with better wages and better benefits than it is to hire new staff. Hiring new staff is really expensive. It is much cheaper to keep the staff you have and give them what they want. But companies just seem to not do that. But hiring in new people is way more expensive than treating the staff you have really well.
Yeah. And my manager said to us that, well, one, she had to forego a pay review to basically allow us to get pay reviews.
Oh,
Um,
that's kind of crappy. Like
yeah,
that they had to do that. I mean,
yeah. And she also says that like she wouldn't leave the job she's in, no matter like how like political it might get, because she knows that she can basically disconnect at any time. She can she has the ability to step away from like her desk and play with her dog and paint. She paints Warhammer minis as well.
Nice.
She can, so she knows that like she's in a workplace that allows her to do these things, and because it supports, because the money that she gets supports her lifestyle at the current moment, she values her time more than the money she gets, and she controls the time that she spends at work, basically, and that's why she wouldn't leave.
Yeah, that's typically what makes a happy employees. Like I see that a lot with the people I work with. Like almost everyone that I work with, almost not all of them, have children. So having the flexibility to work from home is so helpful, and I I find it really helpful. Because just the way my brain works, I'm not good particularly at being consistently productive. I have periods where I am incredibly productive and get huge volumes of work done. Um,
Mm. Oh,
and
same.
yeah, but there are some times where it's like if I try and answer another email, my brain is going to melt out of my ears. Like it just, but it's nice to have that freedom when you're in an office every day and you have people watching over you to make sure you're being productive. It's not conducive to actually being productive.
Yeah.
It's almost as if crazy. It's almost as if humans like have a natural drive to work. That's why universal basic income would work. People do want to work, but they just need to
Hmm.
be able to work in a way that is accessible and, you know, conducive to the way they want to live their life. Um, the idea that given the option, everyone would be incredibly lazy and do nothing. It's just been proven wrong time and time again. People, human brains like having something to do, but no one likes being micromanaged.
Hmm. I think it'd be good to have a discussion about universal basic UBI.
Yes.
The Is like I'm not against the idea, but I think there's kind of two ways about it, where part of it's like the welfare state as we currently have, as it like trying to support people. I know it's not exactly universal basic income, but it's kind of like a similar thing,
Mm.
where it's giving people money who currently aren't able to work, and you'd want to have that sort of lifeline for people who, well, basically everybody, like universal basic income being universal, that everyone has this lifeline that if you get made redundant, you're not going to be in the hole,
Yeah.
where you're going to have to start, you know, uprooting parts of your life that you basically need to survive.
Yeah.
There's also the Scandinavian model, which isn't too far from what we've been talking about, which is basically uh, tax getting the tax system in order that it services that public services get the funding they need, so that um, people are supported. And I feel like the Scandinavian model is a bit easier to pitch than universal basic income, because conservatives really seem right wing people seem to really be against, giving poor people money.
Okay. I don't think like I know some stuff about UBI, but now I'm wondering if I have the two conflated. I'd be really interested to sort of look into that and do a podcast
Mm.
episode about that because now I'm wondering how much I actually know.
Yeah, there was some, because this was a thing that was being talked about in I Watch Politics Joe. So there was ages ago there was a podcast episode where they were basically having this debate about like universal basic income, which is just like an income, a government subsidized income, as opposed to using that income that you would have gotten, but then putting that towards basically contributing that to a public service that you would use, like say the uh, bins, for example,
Yeah, like
which I know is
public
currently publicly.
services. Yeah.
Yeah, like like what Taiwan did during the COVID when the pandemic happened. Taiwan sent like care packages to
Hmm.
their to everyone in lockdown basically to help them. To be like, hey, is like food, medicine, anything that you might need during this pandemic, to avoid them basically having to go outside.
Oh, okay. No,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't really.
This is a whole podcast worth of
Yeah.
discussion that we could go into, and we didn't, we haven't. I'm rambling. Uh,
That's okay. That's
so
what editing's for. It's fine. We'll figure it out.
yeah. So final thing on the final two things. One of them is going to be more annoying than the other. Defense budget being increased to 2.5% of. I put in GBP, but I was supposed to write GDP. Uh,
Yeah.
2.5. I mean, I'm not. I don't know who would be opposed to this other than I guess reform.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
definitely not opposed with the way things are generally in the world. I don't think putting more money into the defense budget is necessarily a bad thing.
yeah. Could be. Um, they haven't said much about Israel, but
No,
I
of course
assume
they've not. No.
yeah. The defense budget I think is something I feel like. I mean, the UK can't do much with Israel, and I don't think the US could withdraw support because that would be the most ideal thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like not a lot of people can do anything about Israel at this moment in time.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
uh,
the UK does also provide support to Israel, and I really
yeah,
would like to see that support be pulled as well. But um, I don't think we will. Um, I think with
yeah,
the way they treated Corbyn, Labour made their stance on Israel Palestine perfectly clear. Um,
mhm,
and they've managed to turn like the whole, well, not the whole country, but large swaths of the uh, the Labour voters against Corbyn, with the sort of slanderous lies about him being anti-Semitic because he had the nerve to criticize a government, which you can't be racist against a government because they're a
mhm.
government. But okay, it's
Not exactly the a faith there, are they?
yeah, I'll never, I'll never get over what they did to Corbyn. I'll
Yeah,
always be annoyed.
I mean he's still a force to be reckoned with as an independent, which I feel like independence. So if people aren't, I'm trying to put this gently, fucking stupid, they won't just see as like the point about like the election. A lot of what I've been seeing now as well, comments, mainly YouTube comments and Reddit comments, is about like people saying they're never gonna vote Labour again.
Yeah,
Um, and thinking about my constituency, the Conservatives have no like hold over here. So the biggest threat Labour had in my constituency was Reform, who only showed up in the election and then haven't done anything since, at least as far as I can tell.
yeah,
Um, so over, at least in my constituency, without Reform, you have Labour and then you have Lib Dems.
yeah,
Um, and I think Conservatives right now have basically nothing. I mean, they demonstrate. Kemi Badenoch has like no platform to run on. It seems like every economic policy that they could possibly put forth is going to get shot down as why didn't you do this in the last 14 years? Uh, uh, so people basically don't have any trust in the Conservatives in doing anything that they say that they're going to do because they had the chance and they didn't. Labour have been given, they've, after a year, or we're coming to a year in July, Labour have demonstrated that they're willing to squeeze the working class. Reform, I don't know why people would think Reform wouldn't be doing something similar, except, because, I, I don't know if people realize this, but Reform is to the right of Conservatives,
Yeah,
of the Tories.
I think people. I think the thing with reform is people are just blinded by their disdain and apathy towards immigrants.
Mm.
It that is definitely at least 3 podcast episodes. It's the
Yeah,
way we treat immigrants in this country, specifically Muslim immigrants or Muslim citizens. For that fact, is
mm,
just like so. The reform flyer that I got through my door, literally the first bullet point is just stop the boats.
mm.
It's like that's so it, it I would have to think more concisely to form a coherent argument against that sort of rhetoric without just sounding like an unhinged crazy person. But
Yeah, but yeah, I just hope people will. This is the benefit of our country as opposed to the US, where we have, if Labour don't work, the Tories don't work, Reform hopefully doesn't. I mean, Reform are struggling with 4 MPs, and they're currently having a row because of Robert Lowe.
the
Not going
Civil
to go
War.
into it. Yeah, they have 4 people and they can barely manage them. Uh,
Well, fascists
the
are historically very stupid. That's why they always end up
Yeah,
failing.
they just start bickering. I mean, when you have okay, I can't get into the Reform UK Civil War. It's too stupid to
Yeah.
go into. Um, but like we have alternatives. You have the Lib Dems who are think they've had a black mark on them since Nick Clegg, which is understandable. Because they entered a coalition government and then basically got completely neutered since then. So the Lib Dems don't have much of a. I mean, they don't have much
They don't have
public.
anyone's trust. Like, no one trusts the
Yeah,
Lib Dems. Even when they make good points, there's always a part of me that's like, yeah, but will you not just go back on it like you did during the coalition? Because you can't be trusted.
yeah. The Greens, I think, have promise. Um, I guess the problem with the Greens is probably like they've been accused of being NIMBYs.
What?
Um,
What they've accused of being what?
NIMBYs, so not in my backyard.
I've never heard that phrase before.
Really? Okay, I'll have to look more into the Greens specifically, but that's what I've heard anyway. SNP got completely wrecked in Scotland. I don't know what was going on there. Um, it's weird. It's weird. Yeah, I think independents could have a really. I mean, independents probably have a really strong platform to run on, especially because there's like no one party that is really dealing with the working class. I mean, George Galloway was, I guess, supposed to be kind of like supposed to be for working people, but it seemed like that got whatever they were supposed to do got completely absorbed by Reform because George Galloway was. I can't go into George Galloway. I'm trying to wrap this up. Uh, what it basically, yeah, the independents. I mean, the what was her name? I don't. She ran against Wes Streeting in Islington South. I want to say basically in Wes Streeting's the current health minister. He in his um in his constituency, if we had proportional representation, then he would be sharing that seat with her because that's how close they were. she could have to, and she's a British Palestinian as well. Pretty young, pretty knowledgeable. She did very well in the election. She just didn't beat him. Corbyn won re-election. There's still like quite a few independents in throughout the country who are, I think, going to be running against Labour, especially the ones that are dissenting.
Yeah. It'll be
So
interesting to see for sure if we see a rise in
yeah,
independence. Um,
oh, yeah. I mean, Corbyn. If Corbyn leads, like, if he heads another party, if he like unites independents into their own party, that could be pretty strong.
it seems that he hasn't officially done that, but there are some independents that are sort of not following Corbyn because then they wouldn't really be independents, but like they are kind of
Using the same messaging.
yeah, they're kind of banding together but remaining independent because to forming a new party in the UK is generally very, very difficult. So it's whether or not
Mm.
it makes sense to stay as independents until forming a party makes more sense. You know, who knows if they've even discussed these sorts of plans. But yeah,
Mm.
there is definitely a few more independents that I think are going to do better than they have than independents usually do, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. That's all down to if people explore their options.
Yep.
I think.
I think people are
Yeah,
more encouraged to now. And yeah, I mean, there's another point I can make there, but I won't because we really need to wrap this up. We've been recording for like
yeah.
2 hours. But I'll be interested to see
Uh,
how it goes.
yeah. I mean, that spring statement can be summarized as, I mean, my point there: growth, growth, growth. She would not shut up about growth.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll see it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think
I think it's being really optimistic with these measures that they put in.
yeah, I think we're gonna see. I mean, we're already seeing it. Lots of austerity, which we already know it is not how you get economic growth. Um, it sounds like it would be, but it's not.
Oh, I mean, fourth time's the try, right?
Yeah, of course. You just keep trying it. That isn't the definition of insanity at all. That's fine.
Yeah, I think that's all from me. I mean, yeah, we could yap on, but I think we'll leave it there.
If we do, we'll at least do it while we play a game or something. Not
Yeah,
recording. Um,
I
but
mean
yeah.
that could be another one that's just like if we're playing a game, that can just be like our ramble hour.
Oh, I do love a good ramble. In case it wasn't apparent.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I think my final statement on, I guess, the spring state on the spring statement or the Tories. I think it's worth calling this an emergency budget
It
because I think,
definitely is.
yeah, and the Guardian, the Peter Walker in at the bottom in his closing remarks was like, "Oh, yeah, Tories are calling this emergency budget." It's like, no, I think anyone who doesn't agree with these is calling this an emergency budget because she the she was announcing these, like, these are deep now. God, getting back into fucking, but like the OBR underestimated the amount that she would save from these cuts. And so the reason this is being called an emergency budget is because these are announcing new, bigger cuts since the October budget, where she originally announced cuts. So these are more cuts. These are in addition to what they'd already announced in October.
Yeah.
And this is all because OBR said that you're not saving the 5 billion initially promised, you're actually saving, I think, like a billion less or something. And so she had to go even harder. That's why this is an emergency budget.
Yeah. It's not good. But just
Yeah,
remember, growth, growth, growth.
yeah,
If you just repeat it enough times, maybe it'll magically happen.
yeah. maybe, yeah, maybe people inevitably we'll see what happens in April after this non-dom thing goes through.
Yeah.
We might see a little boost. Don't think it will be enough.
No.
Um, but yeah, I think my final thing. I need to say this before I keep talking. Tax wealth not work.
Yeah, tax wealth not work. It's a really great rhetorical thing that Gary Stevenson's come up with, and it's true.
Yeah,
Tax
yes.
wealth not work.
Tax wealth not work, and that is all for today. Goodbye.
Bye.